Now, in order to go to the next stage of understanding the two kinds of principles, now we're talking. You've got principles known as Huququllah and Huququl Ibad. Does that mean we have to follow every single one? Does that mean, from an Islamic law point of view, you have been given a very clear distinction? Haram, halal, makruh, makruh tahrimi, makruh tanzihi. This distinction is a very fine distinction. But as scholars, you will be able to demarcate between distinctions which render a person a non-Muslim as opposed to a Muslim. You are now about to come into very deep territory, very deep waters. But in order to understand the word qat'i and zanni, which apply now in both of these groups, you will need to understand a concept which I referred to slightly later. If you look at page 2, you look at mu'awwal and ta'wil. They mean exactly the same, but have slightly different connotations. Ta'wil literally means interpretation. Where a principle or a word is subject to interpretation, we call that word or that principle mu'awwal. So, let me break this down further for you. If there is a word of the Quran, there are two opinions, there are two views. I take one, you take the other. That means that now that word which gives rise to two views is mu'awwal. And the act of deducing two meanings or more, or two interpretations or more to a word of the Quran is called ta'wil. I will give you an example of this a bit later when we come on to doing it properly. But the heart of understanding qati and zanni is to understand what is ta'wil. Ta'wil is a process of interpreting or explaining. Those verses, now we come on to qati. Those verses, this is the definition of qati now. Those verses that are prone to ta'wil, I'll do it the other way around. Those verses that are not prone to ta'wil, please put not in capitals, N-O-T. Those verses or words of the Quran, whether they give law or whether they give beliefs, that are not prone to ta'wil, they are qati.
They mean what they say.
Absolutely. Example? Very easy example. Aqimus salat. Establish prayer. You can't interpret this, can you? Establish prayer means establish prayer. Aqim, the word aqimus salat, it means only establish prayer. Although, as you will realize slightly later on when we look at the word mushtarak on page 2, that mushtarak is where one word or one principle has more than one meaning. But we're not concerned with literal meanings here. We're talking about interpretation. Aqimus salah doesn't have any interpretation. And so therefore Aqimus salah is qati. But that, now this is the definition of zanni. that which is prone to interpretation, ta'wil, is called zanni. If you look at the literal meaning of zanni, the literal meaning of zanni comes from the word zan. And zan means suspicion, doubt. We use it in the Urdu, Punjabi language or Indian language. Zan means, it's a very, sort of old word for doubt. Zan. So, where you can do ta'wil, that is going to be a zanni verse or a zanni word, and where you can't, that will be qati. Okay? Let me give you an example. But before I give you an example, we need to understand just one more thing, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Any verse or word of the Qur'an that is qati, or that has been declared to be qati by the scholars, becomes part of a body of rules known as usool. Now I know you're used to hearing usool fiqh. Please totally disregard your knowledge to that. In this context, usool means principles of deen. So you have principles of deen. These principles of deen are entrenched with evidence that is known as qati evidence. Can you see the relationship? These usools are These usools are usools because they are entrenched in qati. I know this is very theoretical for you at this stage, but when we start applying it, you'll really understand what we're trying to say here. Because this is what separates milk from water. This is what separates iman from kufr. Usool. And it is usool that is made up from evidence that is qat'i. Then on the other hand, you've got furu. Furu literally means branches. So if I can draw a nice little picture here just to explain, this is my version of what is a tree. This part which I'm attempting to color in, this part is the usool. And these branches are furu. Literally, and in every sense of the word, they are furu. Are you going to say, why do we need to know the difference between usool and furu? Well, there's a very real reason for this. Because when you as scholars tomorrow will be judging somebody's iman, somebody's faith or the lack of it, you will be using these principles. Now I know you're going to say, well, are we really supposed to do this? But yes, you are. This is all about coming into the world of Islamic law and theology, that you as students of this discipline are able to distinguish between black and white, distinguish between what is iman and what is not iman. So now the punchline is this: anybody who does not believe in usool of deen is automatically a kafir, a non-believer. I want you to put this in the most strictest of terms. There's no compromise on this issue here. We're dealing with principles, and by the way, these principles are normally taught towards the end of a course of ilm-e-deen, because it's thought that students will be responsible and they'll use this. You can see these are weapons. You know the difference between usool and furu. You can go and apply it to anyone, but of course you won't, inshallah, unless you really know what is going on. So usool, anybody who doesn't believe in usool is automatically, whether anybody declares him to be a kafir or whether he himself knows himself to be a kafir, is automatically a kafir, a non-believer.